Hello, and welcome to Module 1, Performance Objectives. The goal of performance objectives is to establish a solid foundation for learning by stating the desired outcome of instruction. Performance objectives are the description of what you expect your students to do before you consider them competent. Why are they so important? Adult learners typically take a course to increase competency. They expect to accomplish the goal of instruction and get better at something. The clearer you make the objective, the easier it is for them to focus on the outcome. To use a travel analogy, if you choose an exact destination for your trip, it's more likely you will successfully reach it. Like the late philosopher Yogi Berra used to say, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? There are 3 simple rules for writing performance objectives. Preface the objectives with the opening preamble. Use measurable performance verbs. Write 1 objective per subtopic. Rule number 1, the opening preamble. Speak directly to your students by making the following statement confidently. At the end of this lesson, the student should be able to, then list your performance objectives. Why the preamble? Without it, your objectives can be mistaken for your teaching agenda or a list of items you intend to cover. Let's look at some examples of learning objectives without the preamble. You can clearly see how these examples look more like the items the instructor is about to cover and tells the students nothing about what is expected of them. Here is an example of a properly worded objective with the opening preamble. See the difference? Rule number 2. Always use performance verbs like the one seen here. Performance verbs are easily measurable and identify some type of action, something the student must do. Avoid using ambiguous verbs like the one seen here, which are impossible to measure. A student must understand what you will ask him to do in order to demonstrate what he has learned. Here is an example of properly written performance objectives adhering to rules 1 and 2. Note how they clearly describe, in performance terms, the desired outcome of instruction. Now let's look at some examples of improperly written objectives with their proper counterparts immediately following. At the end of this session, the student will understand the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. The problem is, how will you measure their understanding? Instead, at the end of this session, the student will be able to describe the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. That is measurable. At the end of this session, the students will know the components of the asthma triad. The problem is, how will you measure what they know? Instead, at the end of this session, the student will be able to identify the components of the asthma triad. That is measurable. At the end of the session, the student will be familiar with the steps in assessing a patient in respiratory distress. The problem is, how will they demonstrate this? Instead, at the end of the session, the student will be able to list the steps in assessing a patient in respiratory distress. That is measurable. At the end of the session, the student will learn the proper field management of a patient having an acute asthma attack. The problem is, how will you measure what they learned? Instead, at the end of the session, the student will be able to outline the proper field management of a patient having an acute asthma attack. That is measurable. Remember the 3 rules of performance objectives. Use the opening preamble, use measurable performance verbs, and write 1 objective per subtopic.